Welcome to Shorty Supercoach, and today I'm going to take a look at the All-Australian team. I don't often do these sorts of vids, but I thought may as well give it a bit of a crack. I was thinking about it and saw a few people doing theirs, and I thought, geez, that's an interesting selection. So I thought I'd best give it a go myself. And look, it proved pretty difficult. I reckon probably most of the players I just went bang, bang, bang. But there was three positions, which I'll discuss, that I felt were really, really difficult. And to be honest, I'm not even too sure how I feel about them now. I took a few photos on my phone about the team I did just before, but I thought I'd do the old slow reveal, sort of position by position, and talk you through it as I go. And we'll start with the back line. And most of the back line seemed to pan out from one position. And I think, as my press conference is loaded, so that's always handy. I wanted to start with the key position players, and look, I felt pretty comfortable with Harris Andrews at fullback and Jerry McGovern at centre-half back, and I felt Blitzarves was really, really stiff. I reckon Blitz had his hands on the fullback position for most of the season. I think Andrews just pipped him, a slight drop-off with a lot of Geelong players in the second half of the season. And also he moved into the ruck a little bit for even just 3 weeks. Does that affect it much? It's hard to say. On a back flank, I certainly thought Hooley, running defender, you got to have a running defender. He just racks it up. I thought he was a clear-cut option. And then just in the back pocket as well, his teammate Grimes, I think, picks himself. I was very, very confident with that selection. And in terms of finding someone else who can shut a player down and do the job there, looking through, I felt that Shannon Hurn was up as the man, and I think he's probably a guy who can captain the side as well. So that was that in terms of that selection. That 5, I was pretty comfortable with. This 6th defender was one of the 3 positions that I really ummed and ahed about. Tom Stewart was in my mind, Haynes, Rampy, but I ended up going with James Sicily. Now, that might surprise a few, but I think they'll go with Sicily. Not only did he have a really good year, but I think a little bit of it comes into having a good body of work. I know it's the All-Australian team for this season, but he was locked in last year before he did his injury, then he missed out. So I reckon that'll play just a little thought in their mind that he almost deserves one. It's maybe not the best way to go, but I feel as if that does happen. And to be honest, I haven't seen Haynes and Rampy play enough football. We know what they're about, but I haven't seen enough GWS and Sydney games. I've seen a lot of Geelong games, and I honestly don't think Stewart deserves a spot. I think he had an outstanding season early on in the year, a bit like most Cats, and I'll reference that a few times. He was definitely in there. He does get a fair bit of cheap ball. I just felt he had slightly dropped off. And that back line, I enjoy that McGovern and Andrews and Sicily can all intercept and can also shut down a player, tall or small. Particularly Sicily can go the tall or small option. I think Grimes, also capable interceptor, set up the back line. I mean, they can all intercept, but, Hearn could also shut people down, and Hooley's the runner. My battery looks like it's about to die. That would have been awkward. Let's switch that one on. There we go. So that was that. Now, I just want to reference what I did do through the midfield. And there was a lot of players that you wanted to select in their true positions, but it was difficult. So focusing on the midfield, there were 2 guys that I want to have right in the guts. And Cripps is my man for the middle there. And I'm going Dangerfield as your number 1 rover. Now, I know the game doesn't get played like that anymore, and a lot of people might have Dangerfield on a half-forward flank because he can play forward. I understand that because it is tough to fit them all in, and I've taken a liberty like that too. But I think Dangerfield will win the Brownlow. I think he deserves to be smack bang in either the centre or the first rover. So I've got him there. And the wings, I wanted to respect the wings. I wanted to have a genuine player that I felt could play out there. And look, it was difficult because I probably thought that Hill would get in the squad, and maybe someone like Hendo as well I thought might be in there. But I mean, one of the wings was quite simple, and that was McCluggage. Now, the other wing was difficult because going through, there's a lot of talk about a wingman, getting in. I don't feel as if there's another genuine wingman. So I felt I wanted to get a fella in who can play both outside and inside very well and is a nice ball user. And I ended up going with McRae. Now, he was so stiff to not get picked last year. So a bit like Sicily, I think he's an absolute lock. He's been outstanding. A lot of talk about Bont from the Bulldogs being up there for the Brownlow. McRae will be right up alongside him. And I wouldn't go as far to say as he'll hold better than Bontempelli, but he'll be very, very close. Ruck is obvious. Grundy has been outstanding. And who did I have in my other position? Yeah. And I've gone Fife. I think he will also be right at the pointy end of the Brownlow. That's why I've got him there. So moving on to the forward line. Full forward. Well, I'll start with centre-half forward. I'll leave the one that I undernard about. Centre-half forward, Jeremy Cameron. Coleman medal has been outstanding all year. Let me get a little reference going here, just so I don't forget. In terms of small forwards, I really wanted to acknowledge, some of those guys, and Charlie Cameron's been outstanding. And another bloke capable of being an absolute match winner in a similar role is Michael Walters. And look, I've put the young Gazza Ablett in there. I think he's 35 years old, and I think he's going for his 9th All-Australian blazer, and I think he deserves it. Now, I know he hasn't kicked as many goals over the last 6 or so weeks, but his tackle numbers have been outstanding. Now, that wouldn't resonate with many. A lot of people would say Gazza doesn't tackle, but he's really been very, very good. Outstanding ball user, one of the best kicks inside 50 in the competition. And I think it's important, and this goes for everyone, to not forget how good players were in the first half of the season. I think it's easy to get sucked in to the latter half and then sort of say how they were better than this player, but it's sometimes because we have forgotten just how good they were early. Sometimes they do drop off, like I mentioned with, say, Blitzarves or a Stewart, but I think Ablett had a really good game on the weekend, particularly finished the season really well. But while he hasn't been as glamorous with hitting targets and kicking goals in the forward 50, he's been doing bits and pieces of that, but his tackling has been really, really good. So I'm putting him in there. And on the other side of the half-forward line, and this will make a little more sense when I sort of conclude it, but I've got Bontempelli. Now, some people will say, why don't you have Dustin Martin in there or Dangerfield? Look, Dusty's in the team, but I don't think he deserves a spot on the ground ahead of Bontempelli. You could perhaps exchange both those guys, but I think Dusty's start to the season, while Bontempelli wasn't on fire, both have had better second halves. But I think Martin was pretty poor the first 5, 6, 7 weeks. So it's a tough one, but I've gone Bontempelli because they can both play forward, and I think the Bont deserves to be named on the ground. It's a much of a muchness, and, it doesn't matter too much in the modern game, but I think All-Australian to be named on the ground is far more prestigious than on the bench, and I think Bontempelli deserves that. Now, the full forward position was really, really difficult, and it came down to Ben Brown and Tom Hawkins. Darling was a fleeting thought, and, I think, Lynch wasn't even named in the squad either, but Hawkins and Brown, it was extremely difficult. If you look at their numbers side by side, they're almost identical. Hawkins has him a little bit in terms of possessions, but Brown kicks more goals, only just, and I think, like I mentioned with a couple other cats, Hawkins was most definitely the All-Australian forward, probably the pick of him alongside Cameron early in the season. There was a run of 4 goals where he just kicked 4. I think till round 12 he was just on fire. And he's had some big games in the second half of the season, but he's been shut down a lot. Now, I know Brown got gifted a lot of his goals when he kicked the Big 10. They were really looking for him. So you can't read everything into that big bag of 10. But he did pip him for goals. And look, I have gone Ben Brown. And it's honestly it's the toughest selection that I had to make. Is it a little bit of Geelong bias? I don't know, because Brown has been kept quiet too. He didn't take a mark against the Cats down here. Hawk didn't take a mark against Port. an example of two really quiet games they had. It was extremely tough to split. Now, I think there is perhaps a little bit more romance about Ben Brown, and I think the selectors may go with him. If I was picking a team to line up in September and just, schoolyard style, I'm picking Tom Hawkins. Maybe there's a little bias involved, but I think the selectors will go with Ben Brown. So that's how my on-field team looks. Now let's take a bit of a suss of the bench. And look, I'll kick it off with a guy who isn't the number one in his position, but I think he deserves to be in there, and that's Max Gawn. It's crazy how he sort of gets overshadowed sometimes by Grundy, but another stellar season, particularly in a poor Melbourne team. He deserves his spot, no doubt about it. And this is where it came down to, I feel like the bench positionally doesn't really matter. I was just scrolling through guys I felt I needed to get in, who deserve to be in. Talia, I don't think so. Zorko, definitely right in the mix. He's been really good. Neil, clearly in the mix. Brownlow medal, fancy. Treloar, racks up the possessions. Definitely a chance. Pendlebury, no. Blitzarves, we've talked about. Kelly, again, first half outstanding, but he fell away too much. That's a no. Hawkins, we've covered. Same with Stewart. Haynes. Cunnington, very good, but honestly, in the calibre of this, he didn't come down to my absolute final selections. Boak, I think, has had an outstanding season. And he's, again, let's not forget just how good he was early in the season. Very, very good. Prestia, I think a lot of Richmond fans will sing the praises of him. He's been outstanding. But while he's been very good, I just didn't have him in the final thinking. I've already said Martin makes it. Rampy, he had to play in that halfback slot or nothing. Gaff, no. Shepherd, no. Yo, sorry, Gary Lyon, but it's a no from me. I know you love him, but for me, it's a no. Jack Darling missed out in the forward spots. Shuey, another outstanding season. He's a clutch player. It was a no from me. Perhaps that's my lack of seeing WA games showing through. Some Western Australians might be having a crack at me. Dunkley, right in the hunt. Maybe doesn't hurt you enough, but I'll show you what I went with in the end, and I'll talk about a few things. I felt that this man just has to be picked. Okay, he's dropped off a little bit as the season's gone on, but he did have 51 on the weekend. Okay, probably the 4 to 5 weeks leading up to the final round, he had been quiet, but I think he's probably played 14 or 15 outstanding matches, and he was dominant early in the season, so he's in for me. I've already said Dusty gets in, and I think he certainly deserves that. He's coming into some outstanding form at the moment, really damaging, and we've seen some sort of 2017 Dusty. And the final spot in my All-Australian team was really, really tough. And look, I'll tell you what it came down to. It came down to Treloar and Boak, with Zorko being a pretty stiff podium finish. And you could probably mount the case for Cunnington. And Dunkley just doesn't hurt you enough and came into it in the last sort of 14 or 15 weeks. It came down to those guys for me. Zorko and Treloar are an interesting one. Treloar will rack up 35 plus a lot. But Zorko only needs 25 to really hurt you. I think Treloar to top the possessions was outstanding. But Boak, I don't think we can undersell just how good he was at the start of the season, and he was really back to some of his stellar best. Now, to be honest, right here, right now, I still am not fully convinced. I feel as if Treloar's ball-winning ability and outstanding footy needs to be rewarded. And so does Zorko's, for a different feel of that score involvements, possessions leading to a scoring chain, of course, score involvements, that sort of stuff he was outstanding at. Let me just have a look at his stats again. To sort of highlight sort of the differences that we saw. 22 touch average, goal a game, But, you know, the 7 tackles, really, really impressive. And then it's, again, different for Treloar because he's sort of death by 1,000 cuts style, but he still hurts you. Averaged nearly 34. He went, you know, he kicked goals, only 10, but still a solid return from midfielder. Big clearance player. And then we've got Boak, who averaged 30, just over 30, 5 tackles a game, 7 clearances, massive. So I think those numbers may surprise some. I think the thought is that maybe he dropped off a little bit towards the end of the season. You know, he also kicked 10 goals. You know, Zorko kicked the 22, more half-forward role. Look, in the end, I don't know if everyone will agree with this, but I went Travis Boak. Sorry about that. I was just about to give you my Boak reasoning after dropping the controversial bomb, but one of my roommates came home and I just had to put a pause on that video and ended up going to get a hot chocolate at Anglesea. But anyway, I'm back, and as I was discussing, I went with Boak for the final spot. I'll be interested to see what you guys think. Feel free to comment your All-Australian team, or at least comment on some of these ones that are maybe controversial or a bit difficult. I feel like a lot of those top-line midfielders are easy, but who'd you have as your 2 key forwards? You know, did you pick Gazza? Did you find a spot for Boak? Or do you think Treloar's been robbed? You know, let me know what you think, because as I scroll through here, as I was saying, the only ones I feel like I could have got in that I didn't were Zorko, Treloar, and that's probably it. Dunkley's a little stiff, but I think that's fair that he misses. Yo's probably in the conversation. And look, Rampy and Haynes and Stewart, very good chances for that half-back spot, but just didn't find them. So, look, let me know what you think. That's, as I scroll through, that's sort of how the team does look for me, in my opinion. I would be interested to see what you guys think, but I'll do another video in terms of what is coming up for Shorty Supercoach. Just a video dedicated to that, sort of my plans and movements over the next few months and onto next year. But for the minute, I would say this would probably be one of my last videos for a little bit, but we'll see how we go. So thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you soon. Cheers.